Welcome to another episode of the Takeaways podcast. On today's episode, I'm with a person who really knows a lot about tech, be it from the Silicon Valley or coming here like in Africa, like trying to build products that are really going to advance what we are trying to do like in technology. I'm talking to Kevin Kissi, and the story of how we met is actually quite like interesting. I remember it was back in 23. We were at OR Tambo. We were both flying to Cape Town for some event. I forgot precisely what event that was. And then we struck up a conversation. I did not know he was in technology. How we started the conversation was that we were talking about hair, because I have like dreadlocks, I have like really long hair. So like he was quite like inquisitive about me, and he used to have an afro. So we kind of got into that conversation, and then I found out that, he worked like in big tech, like in Silicon Valley. So that's how we kind of got from that. But today is not about me, it's about him and the wonderful work that he's been doing over the last few years at Zof AI. He will tell us more about what that is. And hi man, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's been a long time since I last met you, and I'm very glad you followed up and stay connected. We're going to the Africa Tech Festival, and at the time I also was rocking a bit of a longer hair, and you were like an inspiration of the kind of style I wanted to rock, but I wasn't ready for the maintenance cost that came with it. So
yeah, man, 100%. It's such a pleasure to be here. So to start with, right, let's start with you, right? You are originally from Ghana. Can you just take us through your career to how you got, like in coding, like in software engineering, to how your career then progressed from you, going to big tech and then like coming back to become a founder? How did that entire process go?
Yeah, my career hasn't been a straight line. I was set course to become a mechanical engineer. So I actually studied mechanical engineering for a while. And then I woke up one day, I did 2 internships as a mechanical engineer. One with Case New Holland, they make tractors like Caterpillar. And then I worked for a Windows company that makes Windows, Marvin Windows at the time. And I just felt like mechanical engineering is boring. I mean, you just do a bunch of designs on CAD and you do some stress analysis and a few things, and then you call it good. You're done. You just use equations that somebody else, discovered, right? You don't actually like discover something that I felt to be, quite novelist. So I decided to actually focus on math. So I went back to school and majored in mathematics. I thought I was going to be a professor. That interest just started to wind down. And then I found my new love, which was software engineering. So I taught myself how to actually write code myself at that age. And shortly after that, I met some guys at a conference. We started to start a company. At the time, this was the first, my first AI company. It's called Aura. So it was a conference, NASB 2015 conference, national conference. That's where we met at a hackathon. And we built something pretty cool, context-driven ML services that come into context based on wherever a person is. So wherever the location of the person is, whatever is relevant, all of the different services come into context. And that's basically what something like ChatGPT is, right? Whatever question you ask, there's a whole host of different tools behind the curtain that get called to actually, do some work and then come back to you with information. So that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to advance too well based on funding. Everybody started getting jobs. I think, is it 4 boys? Yeah, 4 boys at the time. Everybody started getting jobs. And so that just kind of slowly died a painful death. Got into consulting, struggled a little bit, kept it alive, decided to get into corporate America. So my first corporate job was actually with a construction company that wanted to do some advanced software, engineering stuff with their current practices. I was able to do some pretty interesting stuff for them. And shortly after that, went into, Boston Scientific. And then after that, went to work at a big bank, US Bank. I think is the 5th largest bank in the US. And most of the assets is mostly mortgages. And so they're very, very conservative. But Because of how conservative they were really behind on software testing. And so they want to get a little bit more, you want to get away from manual testing into automated testing, which if you really push the time forward, you notice that's kind of how I ended up getting closer into testing, and now it's Zof AI. But I did some pretty cool stuff while I was there, and enough to land me a job as a principal manager at Microsoft. But there is where I got the full picture of the high stakes of software, because I mean everything we push out there is being consumed by millions to billions of devices, right? And humans behind those devices. And so high fidelity products that we push out there. So the team that I manage, we really spend a lot of time testing everything and making sure everything works exactly as it's supposed to, making sure that we've covered all security corners. We're getting all the different teams involved and making sure that everyone is aligned in the direction that we're heading. And so I'll probably get a little bit more into all of that, but that's the journey that led me from, my infancy in college and all the way to Microsoft. And then I left Microsoft to found Zof AI, which is a software testing platform, which we've morphed now into reliability infrastructure, autonomous reliability infrastructure, which is a different way of looking at quality entirely. And we're pushing ahead in that trajectory, and we're very happy about that.
Let's speak more on your time in big tech, right? How was that like experience for you? Because for people who are in technology in Africa, being able to get a job in Microsoft or Amazon or any of the big tech companies is a dream for most people. How was that process for you? How did you get in there? And through those years that you spent there, how was your experience? What worked for you and what did not work for you in that time period?
Yeah, I'll say that. I mean, Microsoft and all these big tech companies is a dream for everyone anywhere in the world, really. We have a very, very high bar. They have a very, very high bar. Saying we because I used to manage there, but there's a very high bar for entry. But fundamentally, I think everything is like a step, right? You take this first step to get to this step to get to the next step. I think my internships were with big enough companies that people knew about. That helped me get the first job. And then that same job is well known enough to give me the second job. Like Boston Scientific is a Fortune 500 company. So that helped me get the US Bank job. And the US Bank is well known as fifth largest bank. That helped me get the Microsoft job. Microsoft is looking for, hey, have you worked in large scale, hyperscale environment? Well, I won't say US Bank is hyperscale, but pretty high scale. We have millions and millions of customers that consume the services that we design and we build on top of. And so, I think the easiest path is one company to the next company to the next company that's closer and closer in alignment in that trajectory. So big company to another big company to another big company. And so it made sense at the time when I was getting ready to move, right? But I think most of it is, anywhere that I found myself at, I strive to be the absolute best there. And it's just a thing about me where, I just want to do my best work. And I enjoy the feeling of knowing that my teammates are benefiting from good work that I've done, right? Making things a lot easier for everybody and clearing the ground, showing new ways of doing things, teaching other people. So I was always actively trying to see what is new out there, incorporate that into my skill and my practice. And one of the things that I don't recommend people do that today is I work long hours. I work extremely long hours back then, and that really helped me really stand out everywhere I find myself at. So when I'm telling the story about the job that I did at a certain company, it is exciting for people who are interviewing me or people who are listening to me, because a normal person don't do those things, and so that makes you kind of put you at a different place. And so those experiences really I would say that building really high quality experiences not just being at a place just to, earn money and earn a living, but like doing something exceptional, getting into the projects that are really, really consequential for the company, that really drive business from 0 to 1, like, take up a project that nobody wants to touch because it's so complex. It has so much brittle layers to it, and trying to find ways to do it in an optimal way that really speaks volume when you go that direction. And so that's what I've done most, all of my career. And I think I've always loved the thrill. I don't like boring things. I like the thrill of doing something interesting. It's not always just like working, hard till you fall down before you drop to sleep or whatever. But it's like picking the interesting things within a company and within whatever I'm doing or wherever I am, and working really hard to see it come to life. I think it's easier to be driven when you're doing interesting things, and when you do things you're genuinely interested in, you work harder at those things naturally. And the next step, the bonuses and all the different promotions become natural without you actually going to ask for it, because you become so indispensable and so valuable that any company will hire you in a heartbeat. Some of my interviews, I don't even reach the house. I don't even get home, and I get the call, hey, we'd like you to do this. And they're talking about salary. And, that's what got me to where I am.
I think it's inspirational to see, just the trajectory that you have had. So you spent 2 years at Microsoft, right? And then from then, that's when you pivoted to being like a founder of a startup, right? What drove that pivot? Because I imagine, again, for most people, a job in big tech is, like a dream come true. Like for some people, if they manage to get in, their goal is like, I'm going to like retire here, right? So what drove you to like go from that job to now like trying to start and do your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think any job I find myself in, that job or that company has a high bar to meet for me to be able to stay very long. I mean, a company would need to really like keep me interested in, like, based on the different things they have going on. That I think maybe, I don't know if I am still I think I am generally the same person, but I think back in the day, I just, the more complex a project is, the more exciting I find it to be, because I wanted to always do something that has never been done before. If something has always been done this way and I'm just taking the same path and doing it exactly the same way, it's not really that interesting. And I think the people that work for me, I try to get them excited, keep them excited. As a manager at Microsoft, one of the things that I spend a lot of my time thinking about is, how do I give this person or that person things that is going to motivate them, things that are going to get them excited, so they're going to work their hardest and do their best work, so that it will make justification for me to be able to, promote them or give them that bonus, right? And so, if you give somebody a boring, task or work to do, and you don't see the best performance out of them, I think it's partially just also on you, the manager, not finding them good work that, will keep them, busy and happy. And, I think one of the things too, I did a good job. I try to do a good job at too, beyond just the work being the key motivator, also fine tuning people's minds and attitude towards the important work that we still have to do, right? Because you're not always going to find extremely, exciting work for people, but you also have to keep them excited. So one of the things too I do myself as an individual is I find exciting things in things that might not be exciting as well, right? And so all that helps me keep going. And so at a place like Microsoft, why would I leave a place like Microsoft? I got to a place where I felt like I wanted something more creative and something more exciting and something less defined. I wasn't so concerned about the prestige and the livelihood that you get from a company like that. I mean, I was ready to give all of that up, in a heartbeat, to chase something that is truly new, has a greater impact in the world, and changes things entirely. I know I could have done a good amount of stuff that would, impact billions and millions of people. And we release software that has that level of impact. But I think in a startup, one thing you get is you get full autonomy, absolutely full autonomy. The only autonomy that you start to lose is when you start ingesting bigger and bigger clients and you start to do things in a more, you become a bigger company. You have to, your practices have to be very, very well calculated. The decisions that you make engineering wise have to be very well calculated and very, very strategic. You become a little bit more risk adverse. But when you're starting a company from scratch, you're building a product from scratch, you're making all the decisions and you can choose what direction you want to go to. And you can take all the risks you want to take, right? And basically your only consequence is that a project fails entirely, right? But you work at a company, when the project fails, I mean, you have to still answer to somebody, even in a startup, when you have investors and all that. But I think the stakes feels a little bit lower when you're starting a startup, right? And the creative process is a little bit more exciting than, say, being in a well-defined company. A lot of times you're integrating into existing code. You're learning something that already exists. You're following a practice that already exists, and you're adapting a culture that already exists. In a startup, you get to build your own from scratch, right? You just get to figure it out. And part of the reason why I feel, I see the trajectory in my life is, I left mechanical engineering because I felt like there isn't enough creativity there. And then I went into mathematics because I felt like there was so much creativity there. And then I felt like I wanted to see something physical and have some impact to my creative work. So I found myself getting into, software engineering. And I could see that, like, when I make these set of decisions, a lot of times they're overly weighted on the creativity and the learnings that I'm going to gain based on that choice that I'm making. And so I think with the startup, I've learned so much. I basically have maybe 3 PhDs in the domain that I'm building in, right? And I'm always reading everything that is out there and studying everything, and actually involved in the code and also actually involved in the management of people. And I'm learning so much from the people that are building with us. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Before we jump into the nitty-gritties of what you're currently doing at Zof AI, what advice can you give to a young person who is kind of like trying to think of that leap of faith of like going from like a really good job like in software engineering, either like in corporate or in big tech, and they're trying to jump to trying to start a startup? What's the core advice you can give for them there?
The number one thing I would say is you have to have, I'm being very blunt, you have to have your finances in order. I think one of the cool things you can do is find something that can bring you residual income that you don't actually have to like spend time on. Basically just replace your income with such income from working that full-time job with some other income that you don't actually have to spend time. You have to trade your time for it.
So you mean something like being like a consultant or something of that sort?
No. When I say those things, I mean I see certain things like maybe like real estate is one of those things, right? You just collect rent, you just collect payment from people, like some people also do farms that are managed by someone else and just collect the proceeds that come from that. Something that doesn't require any of your time, almost 0% of your time, right? So that you can fully focus on the startup that you're building. And, the reason I say that you need to actually stabilize yourself in terms of income is, when you don't have a consistent income or good finances, it can be a distraction when you're building software. When let me just step away, not just building software, when you're building a company, when you're building a startup, finances can be a distraction, right? You might find yourself even taking, investment deals that are not good for you, right? And you can take some shortcuts to monetize quickly when maybe you can play the long-term game, right? And so I think when you're building, you got to build in a position of clarity, right? Clarity of judgment and not pressure, right? One of the key things I've really been blessed with is Zof is, honestly, a lot of good things have come out of working at Microsoft. I was set off, in a financial place where I can, leave and be able to do what I want to do. And I think that's one of the things that is very important. I think also if you're choosing to leave a stable company, you have to be like ready to endure failure. The road for startup is up and down. There are a lot of good times. There are a lot of bad times. There are a lot more bad times a lot of times. You see other competitors entering the market. You feel like this big company is going to make you obsolete. And, and Zof has just been constantly growing and becoming deeper and wider and over the years, right? It's just only about 2 years and some months here. But we've not been the same company since we started. And that's because like there's a lot of work involved in, keeping up the pace and, keep things moving at all times. You're not going to stay in one place. You're not just going to build a company and then it's just going to stay the way it is. You're going to have to continuously evolve. Whatever the market presents, you have to be there, or you have to also build for that. You have to build for the market today and the market of tomorrow at the same time, right? And you have to do all of that in a very strategic way because you have to get yourself to a place where your company is making money. But to get to that place, there's so many blocks that you have to arrange nicely before you can get to that first customer that's ready to pay you and you'll be able to deliver that good service to that customer. And, even that's off. I mean, we've had customers that we've had to let go, because we realized that we want to change the trajectory of the company. We want to move away from what we're doing today and do something else. And we don't want to find ourselves supporting something that we're no longer trying to do, right? So these are very, very tough decisions that you have to be making. Now, if you're going back to the finances, if you're really struggling, if you don't have a very stable finance, it's hard to make such decisions, right? You can't make that decision with clarity. You're going to be, motivated in one direction. And then also the game with VCs, they want to see, cash flow right away, right? A lot of VCs, they don't have patient capital, capital where they can just invest and wait. A lot of them want to see a return within 3 to 5 years, a good percentage of them, right? And in multiples. And so a lot of times you might find yourself making certain decisions that might not be best for the company in the long term, but because you're trying to impress, the VCs as well. So these are the kind of things I think you have to like prepare yourself mentally. And now I'll say that before you jump into anything head first, it's very important to do a lot of research before you jump in. Maybe tiptoe a little bit. I did some tiptoeing when I was leaving Microsoft. I tiptoed a little bit into software testing. I went to a conference. I gave a talk about software testing. And this is, a gathering of all the top QA people, I guess, in that conference. And I gave a talk. And, based on my interactions there, I could tell no one is really like innovating in this space quite yet. And so it felt like a completely white space, green field for me to enter and dominate. And so that's kind of like one of the things I was just like tiptoeing, okay, just trying to figure out, okay, who is in the market? What are the plays they're making right now? What are the kind of decisions they're making today? What is their current posture? Are they moving this direction or are they moving that direction? How does my vision lead to a place where I'm going to be ahead of them? Or how do I adjust myself? How do I position myself? All these things, I think is very important to start looking into it. Quitting a job with no plan is a very, 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 very bad idea. I don't encourage anyone to do that. I had a plan. I know exactly what I wanted to do, and I know that it was going to work. I didn't know specifically how I'm going to build a company, but I just knew it was going to work. I can even go as far as just saying that the very, very first part of Zof was just building a browser agent, an agent that can just browse the web and test web apps, right? At the time, it wasn't figured out. Today, it's very, it's all over the place. Everybody has some sort of technology for browsing the web. Back then, it was completely novel. No one had figured it out, right? And we set out to build this. And I had an idea that it's going to work. And I tested it out and I know it's going to work. And so I started out by building in this way. And I realized, oh, let me take a step back, change direction. So I had to try different ways in order to get this technology to come together. But I did start out by knowing that it's going to work, right? Mm-hmm. But, and I had a plan, but I did not know the clear details of how it's all going to come together. Eventually, it's going to all come together. And so what I'm saying is that you don't need to have a plan in clear, nitty-gritty detail, but you need to have a plan, a general plan of what you're trying to do and a general understanding about what you're trying to do before you jump in full focus.
In Jan 2024, you started Zof AI, right? So just share a bit more on the startup and what, pain point exactly that you're trying to solve, and how that entire process of being a founder has been going for the last 2 years.
Yeah, so a lot of companies, I think today things are changing a little bit. A lot of companies build software and then normally, a little bit backdated now. And then they have humans that test the software before they can push it to the world. And then for some time, developers started using AI to write code. And still, there are some humans in the loop testing the software before it goes to production. So you spend a lot, you build really fast, but then you have to slow down and use humans. And then today we have a few services that actually, automate some of the testing, but then they're still human in loop solutions. They are still piecewise testing. You test this small thing and then you click a button to actually test this thing, and then you click a button to actually test this. We came up with an approach saying that, look, you don't need to do piecewise testing. You don't need to do manual testing. You don't need to do any kind of testing that requires human intervention. And you don't need to submit recordings or teach the AI how to click this and click that and do all that. You just give us a document. You give us your user stories and all these other things that give us context about the application that you want to test. And our AI tool tests everything for you. You can select the things you don't want it to test, but it can test everything. And we're full scope, right? When I was at Microsoft, normally before software goes out to the world, you would do your functional testing, which is the basic, performance, basic test that shows that this thing actually works. And then you do some of your performance testing. And then from there, you have to get the blessings of the security team. You have to get the blessings of the privacy team. You have to get blessings of the compliance team. And then you have to get blessings from the accessibility team, right? Before you go to production. We are trying to, dismantle all of that and say that, hey, all of these different entities can be AI agents and can be a cluster of AI agents, a fleet of AI agents that do security, a fleet of AI agents that do functional testing, a fleet of AI agents that do compliance, accessibility, privacy, all these other things, all for you. And it can all work in parallel and test everything for you so that you get that green check box that, hey, we've tested all these different things and you're good to go to production. And so that's what we're doing. And that's more on the software side. We're giving our customers confidence about the software they're pushing to their users. That's what we do. We're in the business of giving customers confidence that the software that their users are using is not going to break. Because we tell them that we've tested everything and it works exactly as they expected it to work.
So you mentioned that back in Microsoft, there was a lot of the blessings you had to get along the way, privacy, compliance, accessibility, etc., etc. The question I have is around this, right? So if you replace this with the AI agents, or I'll give you an example, in compliance, right? If you don't get compliance right, it's quite a risk because, you can open the doors to lawsuits, etc., etc., etc. So how do you ensure that the compliance agents do is quite at a higher rate as compared to when like a human do it. Because, as the saying goes, a computer is a machine, right? Like you can't put it to fault, but like a human being can be put to fault. How do you kind of like try to strike that balance in your product?
Yeah, that's a very good point you've raised there. Let's start from the basics, right? With a computer, right? It doesn't get tired and it can do multiple things at once. A human can do one thing at one time. All humans, we let's just agree that we all think linearly, right? One thought precedes the next. And so we work in a linear fashion. Whereas, computer, you can actually have several linear processes, running concurrently, right? And you can actually reach much wider. And you can go also deeper as well, right? You can also model a human's actions, right? And save it somewhere. You can actually collect a human's intelligence on a specific matter or a specific, subject fully through and through, right? Model the entire experience and everything and save it somewhere. And then you can model an agent to repeat that multiple times over, learn on that, grow on that, and mature on that, and do far-reaching things than that human can do. Okay, so let's just agree on that. Now, with our solution, you are able to do what the human is able to do and more by just what I've explained just right now. When we actually decide that this is an area that we're going to test, so a specific test type, we come up with scenarios under that test type, right? And under that scenario, there are several test cases that come underneath that scenario. And so best believe that there's going to be several permutations of that those test cases, enough to cover any edge cases that maybe a human might miss. Say a human will say, okay, I've discovered that, every time my software team is going to push something to production, I'm going to check 10 things before I let them go to production. Well, a computer or an AI agent can test 1,000 things and probably can do that 1,000 things much faster than that 10 things, not probably, guaranteed, can do that 10 things and actually add, 990 extra test cases, because you covered 10 and we add 990 extra test cases on top of that, right? And so you can feel some degree of confidence that we'll cover more than the human can. So it makes it inefficient to use a human to actually do the same test, because there's a much better version of that test now. And this AI agent is adaptable. So in changing requirements, changing environment, changing software and everything, this human has to come up with a whole new testing strategy, right? And that takes time, right? And they're still going to come up with that, 10 test cases, or maybe now they decide to up their game to 15 test cases, right? Now our AI agent decided to go to 2,000, right? So it can just on the fly evolve, mature in how it tests. It can have a much, much, much better definition of the application under test and be able to adapt itself and be more efficient with how many test cases it chooses to create, and even continue to add more. Now, who owns the outcome of all of the AI agents? At the end of the day, is the human. At the end of the day, all our tools and all our AI agents, they answer to a human, right? So a human owns the responsibility at the end of the day. Yes, you authorize a tool to go out and test. And so it's still you, the human, that's doing the testing. Let's not take responsibility away from the human by saying that, well, this thing is doing the actual, well, I mean, think of yourself as a manager, right? As a manager of a project, whatever happens to that project, it falls on you. Because one, you need to give your team a better instruction. You need to give your team clear direction. You instruct them on what they need to do, right? And not vice versa. You're leading the direction, right? And so these agents that you command within our tool are there to serve you, are there to be an extension of you, are there to be a replica of you, actually multiple thousands of replications of you, right? And so you give it clear directions on how deep you want to go, how wide you want to go, how more specific you want to go, and the agents understand you, has enough context based on your application, probably way more context than you actually do, because it can read the entire code base in seconds, right? And, I can tell you for a fact, me as a manager of what we build at Microsoft, I did not read every single line of code. I did not. I just can't, right? I have too big of a team, too many people writing code everywhere. I cannot read every piece of code. So I have help, right? In this case, you have tools that can scan and read every single line of code in a project and be able to give you clear telemetry on what's happening within the code and everything. You're getting much, much better eyes. Maybe you're a person that doesn't wear glasses, but let's just say we give you, special goggles. Now you get to see way more than what you were seeing before. That's what AI agents are and AI tools are. So people need to people need to move on from the misconception that, we are just delegating all our responsibility to an agent. No, we're not doing that. We're still owning everything at the end of the day.
In terms of the business, right? Are you, who is your market? Are you looking at the individual coders, like in software engineers, or are you more like on the enterprise side?
Yeah, so we're enterprise, but we're focused on mid-market, where we're doing a lot of our marketing is in mid-market. And, that affords us the ability to also go upstream or downstream. We can go smaller or we can go up. But at this very current juncture, we're now mid-market, focus on medium-sized companies. The tools that we've built have enterprise in mind, right? The process I just mentioned to you, say you have to get compliance approval, privacy approval, accessibility, all these extra things that you do is the nature of a big enterprise company, because they push out their high fidelity software, right? Nothing can slip to production that doesn't work, or you cannot have any single security vulnerability. I mean, there are some, they make some exceptions for certain security vulnerabilities, but they're not known. They're not easy to find, right? And they have plans to actually fix it quickly, right? And so testing becomes very, very important for bigger enterprise. Testing is also important for, smaller companies that want to make a good impression, that they care about quality and they care a lot about their customers' experience. They will find a lot of utility in our tool set. They might not use every single agent that we built in our warehouse, but necessarily, there are definitely several enterprises that will use all our tools and bring their own line of business agents. And just, I'm using tool and AI agent interchangeably at this point, but they can bring their own line of business AI agents that do specific, tribal knowledge level, testing through our services, and we hosted, we're the infrastructure behind it. And we also have our own AI agents that run all these steps, and they are highly specialized in any particular area of test. And so that's why enterprise makes a lot of sense for our tools. You can actually come into Zof AI's console. In our console, you can just turn off a number of different things that you don't think you need, right? Your admin can go in and say, hey, we don't need this AI agent. We're not going to use this AI agent. We're not going to use this service. We're not going to use that. We can use this one. We can use that and that and that. You can come in there and configure the service, and it will be completely different from another customer's environment when they log into the console, right? Even to the point of personas. Like if you log in as an admin, your experience is different from if you log in as a developer, right? And so if you're a smaller company, your experience of using Zof is going to be very different from your experience of using Zof as a big enterprise, right? And so we're able to be elastic across markets, but we're focused on mid-markets right now.
You've been building this for the last 2 years, like in terms of, the the uptake? How has that been, in you like trying to show your value proposition and the market responding to you guys, like in terms of traction? How has that been going?
There's been a lot of movement in the QA space, and that should tell you that it's very, very fertile land. If it's not fertile, there won't be that many players entering the market. There have been a few good exits. There's been a lot of huge, fundraisers that I've been seeing. But before, what we were really worried about is customers trusting us to put their testing on autopilot, right? We were like, should we put more stop signs everywhere so they can have more control? We also even put in a manual button. I think we had a design partner, is a big enterprise company based out of France that was interested in our solution. So we had a few meetings with them, and we're building a lot of different features with them in mind. And so we put some stop signs, we put manual mode, so you can go in there and select, okay, don't do this test, stop doing this test, that kind of thing for the AI agents. Because when it comes to automation and AI, we feel like it was a little bit early on, and we basically needed permission. What's happening here is actually trust, right? You need permission when there is no trust, right? And when there is trust that these AI agents can execute and execute well, there's going to be less requirements for permission, right? You can trust that this tool can do a very good job. And you won't need to put anything in manual mode. You won't need to put a lot of stop signs there. So that's what things were looking like, right? And a lot of different companies have been building, with extreme degree of human in the loop direction. But we have always believed that human in the loop is very temporary and it's a waste of time. And so we had always built for full autonomy of testing. And I think it has served us well. The market has adapted to where we are. Customers are trusting an AI agents to do a lot of different work for them, right? And the pioneers in this area, Open AI, some of the stuff that they've built out there have given people confidence that AI can do a lot of things for them, right? And that trickles down to us, where we're, pushing software that tests software. And so we're giving customers confidence that they can go to production. And so there's a lot of mindset shift that is happening with these other bigger players that we're benefiting from. And so that market is now opening up for us as well.
Speaking of the bigger players, how do you think of the competitive environment? Because if you look at, like Anthropic and, like Open AI, I mean, like Anthropic, I think since January have shipped a new feature like every weekday, right? And then if you look at, like Open AI, they have, like a Codex and they slot code, obviously, like at Anthropic. How do you think of the competitive environment in that you are now like playing in a field that also, like interests the big tech players? Are you not concerned that one day you're going to wake up and then like Anthropic is going to launch a feature that's basically what you guys are trying to build?
So it's kind of like, that's the thing I was saying in the beginning about building a company is you're going to be shape-shifting, right? You're not going to just stay at one place, right? If we stayed where we were 2 years ago, we'll be obsolete, right? At the time we were building browser agents first, browser agents is everywhere now, right? It's useless to say I have an agent that tests software by just crawling, and that's the only thing that you do. Now, mind you, there are companies that do that today, and they are able to exist because of the customers that they get earlier on, and they're working hard to keep those customers, right? I actually have another friend who's also running a QA company, and they've been losing customers. They've been losing customers because now customers are not finding much. And so we have been evolving, right? We're not staying in one place. We're moving from one place to another and broadening the scope of the problem that we're solving, and solving in a much more unique and different way, right? A lot of people think that they need to build tools to solve the problem the same way that it's being built, but they're just putting those tools on steroids using AI, we don't think you have to solve the problems, the challenges. We're thinking that the problems that we had yesterday are not the same as the problems that we're going to have tomorrow. And they are not the same as the problems that we have today, right? Before, QA was not like spend a lot of attention on security. But today you have to spend a lot of time on security because these AI agents are writing code and they are creating a lot of security holes, right? The attack surface is growing wider. Now we're opening software. We're opening an environment where it costs someone very little money to actually create a virus or be able to hack, right? They just use a few, AI tools and they just put things together. They can just get something to hack you, right? Even now, 13-year-olds can even choose to be hackers, right? Before you needed like more experienced folks to actually put something together that can actually hack, right? Today, you can just use an AI aid. You can just use, if you're clever, you can use, Anthropic's or Opus 4.6 or, OpenAI's models to craft something that can attack, a large company. Cost them maybe $10, right? In the past, it cost a lot more to do some, offensive, hacking or whatnot. So if you're operating in that kind of environment, your posture to testing and quality should be a lot different.
That's kind of the thought that like I had when I was looking at the work that you guys do, in that the more code is written by the AI, the more, like assurance we are going to need to ensure that it's proper code. So it means that the more AI become like entrenched, like in software engineering, the bigger the market that you guys are playing in. Because as you already said, at the end of the day, a human, has to take responsibility for all the code that's pushed to production, right? So yeah, I think it's quite interesting thing in that people think that just because more code is going to be written by AI, like is going to make assurance obsolete. But I think it's the other way, in that, it's just going to make the opportunity bigger for you guys, right?
Yeah. And one of the things too I want to add is, we're looking at things a lot different now, right? Before, QA is a step before you go to production. Today is no longer a step. Now, you just mentioned earlier that Anthropic is pushing new features every week. That is extreme velocity, right? At that kind of velocity, let's just say you shrink down the velocity down to like daily, they're shipping daily, right? And then maybe in the future, maybe we shrink it down to they're shipping every hour, right? Yeah. At that point, QA has to be what? Continuous, right? That's the only type of QA that will work with this particular problem of maintaining quality assurance, right? But QA of yesterday is, a step. It's a step along the way before you go to production. Today, it cannot be a step. QA has to be continuous. And so we've grown from, okay, use our tool to test before you go to production. No. Okay, now you have our tool as an infrastructure to make sure that quality is at the forefront for your customers. Everything that you push into production, there is an intelligence system that has a warehouse of several tools and fleets of AI agents that are testing everything so that you don't end up in a bad situation. You don't end up in the news, right? You can continue to keep building at the same speed and release at the same rate. But as you're building, we're checking everything as you're building. We're not waiting until you're done building. We're checking everything. Every single time a line of code is being checked in, we're there. Checking to make sure that it meets requirements. We're there checking to make sure it meets the highest security bar. Checking to make sure it meets accessibility requirements. Checking to make sure that it meets compliance requirements, right? And we'll introduce a new direction, which I'm getting ready to make some big announcements pretty soon. We'll introduce a new direction where we're getting way before code ends up in the repository. So QA efforts. And so the definition of quality assurance is completely changing, right? And, Big enterprise, you're worried about them. I'm not too worried about them. They're not chasing the problem the same way I'm chasing this problem. They might get caught onto it, right? But by the time you get caught onto it, I'm way far ahead, and I'm now looking at a problem or solving a different problem that attaches to our current environment. That's basically, the consequences of what we're doing today. They have different things that we need to address, right? And so as a startup, you're able to be nimble, you're able to move fast, and you're able to move quickly. Bigger companies, they cannot move as fast. Anthropic is moving pretty fast like a startup, right? But very soon they'll be too slow. They cannot move as fast as they could, right? And they cannot chase every problem, right? Right now, their core focus is building the absolute best model, right? Maybe they can choose to have, maybe they choose to go deeply vertical into one area, maybe QA. I heard OpenAI also hired a whole team of folks that are going deep into medical. And there are other areas. I think I also heard about another big company that's going deep into physical, models that are best for the physical world. And essentially has clear understanding about the physical world and the physical products and everything. They can choose to go deeply vertical in any area, but think about how many verticals exist. Quite a lot, right? Are they going to choose to go deeply vertical into every single segment? I don't know. But I think when these model companies start to do that, I think there's a very good chance the models stagnate in terms of how good they become. And I think their highest priority is actually making these models as good as possible, right? We look at Opus 4.6 and the previous models, or Opus 4.5, there is a huge gap. Before, you cannot just code generation on autopilot and have something high quality come out. With this new model that just came out, which is Opus 4.5 and now Opus 4.6, you have some pretty damn good software that comes out of it, right? Yeah. Before, I think 3 years ago, I think, that conference we went to on stage, I was saying, look, right now, the models are generating code at the junior to at the intern to junior software engineer level. It's not great. It's not good. It has too many issues, and it leaves a lot of holes, a lot of security holes, a lot of, possible compliance nightmares and everything all over the place. And so if we want to be in a good place, I think the highest responsibility of these model companies is to continue to pump a lot more resources into the models that they're building. When they choose to go, breadth, cover everything, well, it leaves a blind spot for someone else to come out of nowhere and take over their spot, right? And come up with the absolute best model. So they have to actually look at the risk here of going full breadth or stay full depth into the models that they are building, right? Some of these coding tools like, say, Cursor and whatnot, these guys have now pushed out this tools for finding, bugs and everything. But they're just scratching the surface, right? QA is not just finding bugs, right? QA is way beyond just finding bugs, right? There's a whole different governance aspect to it as well, right? So, and that's why I continue to have the confidence in our space. And if you build any company, you have to be ready to keep shifting, keep growing your customer base, keep expanding the footprint of your solutions, and also keep rethinking the problem and finding better ways of attacking the problem. And so there's a constant effort if you want to actually prevail in the market.
You've been building this for just a couple of months, over 2 years now. What does the future look like for Zof AI? And I say the future with the mind that, in AI at the moment, the future means a month from now, right? Because things are moving so fast. But, what does the future look like for you guys?
Yeah, so we're getting ready to release a whole lineup of integrated products that work together to give you high confidence in the software that your users are using. And we're really, really excited about that. The fact that we're pioneers in this area and we're changing the whole entire way we look at software quality. I'm very, very happy about that. And I'm very, very excited about that. Beyond that, current juncture we're in today, I think we're going to continue to grow in terms of the different problems we're going to be able to attack. I think robotics is a place where there isn't enough quality assurance going there. The next stage after we finish building more and more of these models and getting these models to be good, the next stage of AI is physical AI. And there's a lot of efforts in that area today. And with those efforts coming into full picture and being clear and clear enough, as a company, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors to attack problems that can increase our revenue. So naturally, we'll find ourselves at places where we think makes sense and we think is going to increase our bottom line. So we can find ourselves in places like that. There are different things that are going to continue to be clear and clearer. The market's going to be clear where things are heading. As a CEO of the company, I'm always projecting, 5 years ahead of time, 10 years ahead of time, and see where things are going to be and projecting even further. And it's also still keeping in mind that I have to play the dance. I have to be in the arena and dance to the tune of the market. So I keep my reflexes out there of what's happening. And so you never know what specific direction we're heading, but I can tell you that we're going to do our very best to increase our bottom line where we find that it makes sense within our DNA to encroach on.
And then as we close off our conversation, right, I'm interested in your thoughts on both the amount of the innovation in AI that's going on, like in Africa, and the adoption also. Where do you think we are, and what work still needs to be done for us to catch up with the rest of the world? Because as I think it's Bill Gates who said, AI is going to be the most important technological innovation. Where do you think we are, and what steps do you think we can take to really try to catch up with the rest of the world?
I think there are few physical barriers today that keeps a lot of Africans outside of this AI economy. We have a lot of people who don't have access to laptops and have access to enough data for things to really become interesting for them. And we have to start with that, right? We should get more and more people to have computers here in Africa. And then we need to train more people in AI. Right now, I think, the old school computer science degree doesn't work anymore. And so the curriculum needs to adapt to the pace of current technology. So there is important. I think that African companies need to actually see in clear picture that their investment in AI is going to yield a great deal of returns. Because, in the West, they can make a very, very clear financial model as to where they can find themselves, say 5 years or 10 years later, if they invest, say, 100 billion or 100, or $100 million in this direction or whatnot. And I think Africa and Africans and African governments and African companies, need to assess AI clearly and very well. I think that in Africa, there should be a lot of, we don't have a problem with financing. I have to say, there's a lot of money in Africa, but priorities on how to spend money and where to put money is where it becomes a bit of an issue. If we decided we want to actually build our own AI models, it could actually be more inclusive and it can actually be better trained on our African context and our African problems. And that can yield a lot more innovation at a much faster rate, because you have to think about how these models are trained. They are trained on data. If the data they're being trained on is not prioritizing other sources of information and is only prioritizing sources of information that doesn't include Africa, the model is always going to live short of answering to African problems and African technology and African innovation. And so the model companies don't have, a clear responsibility to, make sure that the models serve Africa well. And so, us as Africans have to recognize that if you want to compete with the rest of the world, you should look at China. China recognized that having your own model there are benefits to having your own models, because you have all the local context and, you can train them in what you want to train them with, right? And I think that's one of the things that I think we also need to embark on. And, conversations like this also matter a lot. Expanding, what we know about this current era and where this AI era is heading, and what any individual human in Africa or wherever can do. I think that goes a long way as well. So more conversations about this, getting people to know about this, I think that goes a long way. But yeah, we have to start with, the physical barriers, such as people actually having a computer in hand, having access to data, and then companies, understanding the ROI economics of AI very well, so that they can make clear decisions on, how they can invest in AI and do so. And then also, we need model companies in Africa as well, because they are going to prioritize, African information, African data, and African context in training these said models. And a model that's trained on African context and African everything can only best serve our current development and situation. So, I think this kind of environment where we have models from China, models from Africa, models from anywhere in the world, it puts pressure on these bigger model companies to actually include more context from every facet of the world, right? If no model is coming from, China, OpenAI will not feel the sense to, the need to actually step up their game and maybe include, Chinese, information and local context. The same thing with Anthropic and all these other models. When African companies actually train their own model and do what they need to do, it serves them, and it also puts pressure on these bigger companies. If they want to be inclusive, they're going to do so because of that.
I like to appreciate your time so much, because I think the work that you do, is so incredible. And your story also, from, coming from Ghana to being able to, work in big tech, to then being able to found, your own startup. I think it's an inspirational story for people who will be tuning into the podcast. So I'd like to thank you so much for sharing. And I think it's great work that you and the team are doing. And I wish you all the best going forward.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Cheers, man. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You as well. Thank you. Bye.